All right, so a few basic things that are just helpful, and if anything, I could be the goofus of this. You guys ever read Highlights magazine at the dentist when you were a little kid, and there's Goofus and Gallant? I would be the goofus of this situation. I can be the example. He was basically the guy who always screwed scenarios up. And so I can talk from experience. When I was your age, particularly, like senior year, I got into very bad habits with personal finances. Now, luckily, I didn't have that much responsibility. But that was probably part of the issue, is that for a long time I didn't have much responsibility, and that's not, and that's not on my parents. My dad is very into finances, and he's going to be our other guest speaker at the end of the unit, and he was always interested in teaching me about it. And you know, I just sometimes when you're that age, you make mistakes for yourself, and you don't learn until real consequences happen, and that happened to me. So like I would do things like finances give me anxiety, so I like wouldn't check my bank balance and just try and estimate in my head and get like overdraft fees. Or I went to Europe when I was about 2 years older than you guys, when I was 20, and I just did it on credit cards, and I was like, woo, free money. And I came back like 3+ grand in debt. And I was just paying the minimum on these credit cards. I knew intellectually it was not free money, but from the standpoint of where my maturity was with dealing with finances, I was not there. So now my finances are great, and that I will say in large part is due to my wife, who was a finance major, kind of takes care of everything for us, and then my father, who's like way into investing, gives us advice on sort of what to do, which he's going to come in and do for you guys too. But it takes, and I think Sanchez mentions this as well. It sort of takes. It's very easy to have like an emotional connection to money, and that can make it hard to do things like constantly knowing your balance. I would put it up there with grades, right? I know how easy it is to avoid looking at your grade if you are not doing so hot in a class, or just ignore Canvas notifications or something like that. And that's because you have your emotions tied to it. So one thing you're going to have to do is just start young, learning how to separate your emotional self from your finances. So know your bank balance. And the good news about that is it's easier than ever. All banks have just an app you can check on. You're not needing to physically balance a checkbook on paper pencil to know how much is in your account. It's not taking 3 or 4 days for something you spent on a debit card to clear from your bank account. So there are all these things that have sped up to make it easier to deal with, and also probably that you guys have grown up a little more with. Those things were all kind of changing when I was your age. I graduated in 2001. I'm glad I don't have to look at your faces right now about this. I recognize that's like the year you were born, but things were changing. Like there were no apps or whatever, but they were starting to roll out websites for banks that you could log in, but there was still this like long lag. Okay, Naomi, that was unnecessary. I meant around there. I was estimating. Oh, I guess so. It's 2021, right? So you guys were born well after. Good Lord. All right. Know what you spend. Keep track of debit and credit card spending. So one way to do this is keep your receipts and reconcile your receipts with your bank account to make sure you're not being overcharged from everybody. Now they've made it really easy where you can almost immediately see on your phone something that you've bought. But it's still a good idea to check on your account to make sure somebody's not stolen your account and like buying gas. So that can happen. Don't buy on impulse. Now this one, again, like, yeah, that's good advice, but that's like advice like, make a lot of money and save some of it. Okay, that's hard to do. So buying on impulse can be one of these things where you start to sort of separate your emotional self from your financial self. Now, make a budget. That is, I will say, strong advice regardless, and something we're going to learn about doing today. And there's also free software out there that you should be using right now to track that you can use to create budgets, etc. After 2001. I don't like that. All right. So let's do an example. All right, Cassidy has recently begun keeping her spending under control, but she still can't fully pay off her credit card. She maintains an average monthly balance of about $1,100, and her card charges an annual interest rate of 24%, which bills at a rate of 2% per month. How much is she spending on credit card interest? Now, it's worded a little deceivingly because what do they mean? How much is she spending per month or per year? All right, but we'll calculate per year. All right, so the word annual, all that indicates is that this is the yearly interest rate. That doesn't mean that she's charged 24% every time her bill cycles. That means over the course of the year, she's charged 24% interest. So in a year, there's 12 months. So if we divide the 24 into 12, that's where we get the 2%. 24 divided by 12 is 2. We get the 2% that she's charged every month. So every time the bill cycles, what I mean by cycles is that's when the credit card company gets to charge you interest. And so it says she's keeping about $1,100 a month on the credit card. Well, that's what interest is. They're charging you basically a certain percent of that to hold that debt for you. So every month, in interest, she's accumulating about 2% of that $1,100 balance. Whoops. All right, well, 2% of 11 we can figure out by just creating an equation. 2% is 0.02. Of means times 1,100. And in our calculator, if we do that, 0.02 times 1,100, we get $22, which doesn't seem that bad. But yearly, $22 times 12 is $264. So basically, she's spending $264 on nothing. She's just giving it to the credit card companies just to hold her debt for her. Maybe that's not that much in the scheme of things, but if you're somebody who's in college living on a tight budget, $264 will be like half your rent. So it's significant, and you're just shelling it out to the credit card company. So that's our answer. All right, so some credit card companies can set minimum payments that cover only interest. This is not true anymore. There was a thing passed called the Credit Card Act. This used to be true, but so before the Credit Card Act, the credit card companies just had to give you a minimum payment. So they would send out a bill, and they'd go, okay, here, whatever her name was, Carolyn, you owe $1,100, but your minimum payment is only, let's say, $22. So if I go back to that, if she had a balance of $1,100 on her credit card, and she paid only the minimum of $22. Well, guess what? That's how much interest is accruing each month. So now, great, she's paid $22, she's back to $1,100. She hasn't done anything to pay down what we call the principal. She's still just carrying $1,100. And we're going to learn that what that's called is a trust. Credit card companies really like people who just pay the minimum because they're just giving the credit cards money, right? The credit card is just earning interest on you. So the reason that was deemed illegal is because you would just be paying a minimum payment forever and you would literally never get rid of your balance. You would never pay it off. So I think around 2012, Congress passed the Credit Card Act that required much more clarity on your statements about what you were paying, what percent of the bill you were paying down, and how long at that rate it was going to take you to pay off the entire bill. Because they deemed that credit card companies are just essentially taking advantage of people who don't understand the math behind interest and how that works. So that first bullet point is no longer true. However, if all you do is pay the minimum payment, it could still take you like 30 years to pay down. And you'll end up paying like 600 times the balance, your original balance that you spent on the card. So we'll see this when we start talking about bigger numbers like mortgages that you pay over 30 years. All right, so to avoid that problem, just make sure you're always paying something towards the principal. Again, the Credit Card Act made that true, but they said the rule of thumb is 2 by 24. If your interest rate is 24%, make sure you're paying more than 2% of the balance each month. And better yet, always pay off the entire thing so that you won't have to pay any interest. And that's one thing that Sanchez will talk about. So credit cards aren't inherently bad. You can be taken advantage of, but they've put a lot of rules in place. When I was going to college, some of these rules weren't in place, and so they would really target college kids because college kids are bad with money. Credit card companies like people who are bad with money because they tend not to pay on time, or they tend to only pay the minimum balance, and then you can get charged interest, or they can charge you late fees, and that's really where credit card companies are making their money. But if you're smart, you can take advantage of them. There are tons of credit cards out there that have like rewards, like points or travel points or money back on groceries all the time. And if you're somebody who can afford to use them and then just pay them off before the interest charges, you can earn the rewards without having to pay the interest. You'd say, why would credit cards do that? That seems like that's a bad business model. Well, again, many, many more people are bad with their money than are good. I don't know if you've seen some of the statistics on the percentage of Americans that are in debt. That means they're being charged interest. So you can sort of take advantage of that and be like, well, look, I'm just going to be smart about this. Yeah, you can just use debit cards if you're worried. There are those, you won't generally get rewards on debit cards, but you absolutely can if you don't trust yourself to be able to pay something off. Debit card is just like electronic payment, essentially. Anyway, we'll talk more on it. I don't want to go too down a tangent, and plus I feel like it is a good thing to build good credit. Now, one misnomer is you're not really going to build good credit with credit cards per se, right? So you can get bad credit from credit cards because you could spend on them and then not pay them on time, and that will ding your credit. But generally, that's not how you build good credit. So you're going to build good credit by like taking out a car loan and paying that down, right? Or paying on time, having an apartment in your name and paying rent on time every month, or things like that. So larger purchases that they need to know your credit score for are really what's going to build credit. So once you start getting an apartment in your name, or if you take out a loan and co-sign with your parents on a car and then pay it off without having a late payment, that will really impact your credit. Credit cards really only serve neutral, or they'll ding you if you don't pay on time, just because they're smaller purchases for the most part. Okay. Let's talk about making a budget. It's pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised at the number of people that don't deal with this. So list all monthly income. So you want to include things even that you don't pay monthly, which you will have a lot of. So especially once you're going to college, you may have to pay tuition twice a year. But what you would want to do then is average that out over 12 months. What's the total I'm going to be paying over the course of the year divided by 12? That's what I'll assume I'm paying in tuition monthly. So you want to treat it like it's a monthly bill, even though you don't get a monthly bill for it, you pay it each semester. But that'll allow you to allocate the money and correctly budget for those costs. That being said, once you get on your own, you will have a bunch of monthly expenses. I'm sure some of you already do. Jesus, it's gone insane. I mean, cell phone bill, that's one thing. Rent, of course, these are timeless things. But now everything's a la carte. So you don't just have an internet bill, you have an internet bill. You got Netflix, you got your Hulu. You got your Disney Plus, unless you wrapped those up into a package or you're stealing it from friends. Yeah. So those can be gifts or deaths by 1,000 cuts, right? I'm starting as an adult because I don't feel, I don't know, you hit your late 30s and you start to feel like kind of a scumbag if you're using your parents' Netflix login or whatever. So you feel like you need to pay for your own stuff at that point. But then I'm like, God, there are so many of these. They're all relatively cheap, but you add them up and it's way more than if you just had cable. That's the world we live in now, though. I can't go without my Hulu. All right, so the other things that you'll have monthly, you'll probably have, if you have a job, a bi-monthly paycheck normally. So that's your income. And then this is actually number one. I kind of said this out of order. There could be things you get. If it's something that you can count on, then you'll want to include it in your income. So if your grandma gives you $500 towards tuition every Christmas, and you're pretty sure you can count on that, you would include that in your first step and then divide it by 12, right? That's included as monthly income, but only things you're sure of. And then 3, you're just going to subtract your expenses from your income and determine your net monthly cash flow. So if income minus expenses is negative, if that's less than 0, you're what we call in the red, which is not good. That means you're outspending what you're earning, and that's not a sustainable lifestyle, right? So there's only really 2 solutions to that. You could get more loans, which means you go further into debt, or you can adjust your expenses. If income minus expenses gives you back a positive or 0 number, you are in the black. I know you want to say green, right? But it's called in the black in financial terms. And that's good. You want to be in the black. Trade right away. And we'll talk about why. I mean, right away. You could be a millionaire by the time you're 40 if you start saving when you're 20, right? And that doesn't mean putting away tons and tons of money, but that's one of the things that was very hard for me. And I probably didn't start a retirement. Well, I'm a teacher, and in Arizona, teachers actually get automatic retirement. We get a pension, so that's really good. But you also should start your own retirement account, which is called an IRA. immediately, which won't be taxed, but you're not allowed to access it until you're basically like 65 years old. But it's an easy way to make a lot of untaxed money. And it's just the hard part is going, I'm going to be 65 one day. I never, you can't imagine it. But the earlier you do it, the more you'll accumulate interest in a good way, meaning the bank will be paying you. And the earlier you start that snowball, the bigger that snowball is by the time you get to start taking it out. So it's one of the things that my dad always pressed on me. So I started it earlier than most people, I think, but not. You can only open an IRA once you are working full time, though. So you have to have a full time job. But there are many types of savings accounts you can open in advance of that have many tax benefits that you should be getting in the habit of, even if you have a part-time job, and start budgeting. So those are some things we're going to talk about for sure in more depth. All right, let's do a little fake budget for this person, for you. In addition to your monthly expenses, you have the following college expenses that you pay twice a year. So $3,500 for tuition each semester, $750 in student fees each semester, and $800 for textbooks each semester. How should you handle these expenses in computing your monthly budget? So a lot of students will do this like, well, there's about 5 months in a semester. No, that's not how you want to compute this, right? So you want to think about how many of these payments are you going to make in a year? So regardless of how long your semester is, we'll say it's a semester, and by definition, there's only 2 of those in a year. So each one of these payments, you're going to make twice in a single year. So we'll first compute that. You're going to make each one twice in a year. So I'm going to do 3,500 times 2 plus 750 in student fees times 2. And then 800 per semester, plus 800 times 2 for textbooks. And we'll just add those up. So what is that? That's 7,000 plus 1,500 plus 1,600. All right, that comes out to $10,100 per year. All right, so that's $10,100 for 1 year. I'll just do a little unit conversion. There's 12 months in a year. So I just divide this by 12. That'll tell me what my monthly expense should be based on this. When we do that, we get about $841.67. So that's per month in school-related costs, so tuition, student fees, textbooks, etc., right? So you just want to be careful when you're making a budget, not making these weird assumptions, because yes, semester isn't an agreed upon unit of time, other than it's twice a year, right? So first, okay, that's a great question, Naomi. Those aren't all going to the same place, right? So your tuition will be going to the school. Your student fees will be going to the school. Usually your textbooks you have to buy from a different store. So all you're doing is saying, on average, this is what my expenses per month are. So you wouldn't necessarily pay them all at once. And it really depends. It depends on if you're taking a student loan, if your school is okay with putting you on a payment plan and you're saying I'm going to pay this much each month, it can vary. Regardless, what you're going to treat it like is a monthly expense. So you're going to go, I need this $841.67 each month. I'm going to set it aside. And that's going to allow you to figure out how much is okay to spend each month. And if you're spending above that, you're going to be dipping into some of this money that's supposed to be going. Yeah, Trey, that's not a bad idea. As long as you're rounding in the conservative direction, right? So if you're rounding your income, I wouldn't round that up. I would round that down. If you're rounding an expense, round that up so that you don't end up in the red. No, yeah, I'm really glad to have all the engagement on this. That's why I like teaching this section, because it's like one of those that's actually immediately applicable to your life, and it's kind of finance is such a confusing realm of real life to deal with. All right. Let's see, we only have a couple more. The median salary for full-time worker age 25 or older who is a college graduate with a bachelor's degree or higher is $64,127 a year, while the median salary for a person with only a high school diploma is $36,318 a year. Based on these data, how much more does the college graduate earn over a typical 40-year career? All right, I kind of want to take this one out. I get what they're trying to do, but this is a narrative that has been, like, I feel like, overemphasized from about the year 2000, like from when I was in high school till current day. And it's sort of an attitude where you have to go to college or, you're going to live in poverty and you're not going to be successful and society is going to look down upon you. And I don't think that is necessarily true, and undervalues apprenticeship type positions and sometimes can overvalue the college diploma, which hey, college is great. I think I went to college if it's something that you want to do, but I just think what we've seen is the college diploma get inflated exponentially over the past decade, to where now you guys are going to college in a situation where you're paying twice what I paid, which is just insane. And the value of the degree has gone down because now you also need, a postgraduate degree to have as much value. So this kind of thinking I'm against, but we can do the math of this in a pretty straightforward way. So, and this is also just a statistic, so I don't think we need to tie emotion to it. This is just kind of a fact. I just personally think societally we need to put more value than we do on people who use apprenticeship programs that we're going to need, like electricians and stuff like that. Welders. My nephew's doing welding. All right. So the first person that has a bachelor's degree or higher is $64,127. If we just look at their difference in median salary, minus $36,318. That's a difference of $809 per year. So if we multiply that by a typical career is 40 years, we're just going to be left with the difference in dollars over that span of time. And there's a difference of over $1 million in a person that has a bachelor's degree versus a person with only a high school diploma in terms of median salaries. But again, I value college. I would encourage it, but I also, think students need to be more thoughtful, and we need to drop the societal dependence on prestige and like students trying to get out of the state and go to, you know, a prestigious university, but are paying $60,000 a year to do so. Seems financially irresponsible. Anyways, I have a lot of thoughts on it. But also do what you want to do. All right, I think this is our last example, and then just a couple bullet points. Jorge commutes both to his job and to school, driving a total of about 250 miles per week. His current car is fully paid off, but it's getting old. He spends about $1,800 per year on repairs, and the car gets only about 18 miles per gallon. He's thinking about buying a new hybrid that'll cost $25,000, which gets 54 miles per gallon, and should be maintenance free aside from oil changes over the next 5 years. Should he do it? This is like a real life question. So this is some of the stuff that you have to make decisions about, right? And car, this is near and dear to my heart. We had it was pretty old. I drove like a 2009 Jetta Sport Wagon, and the check engine light came on, and it was in fine condition, but every time I took it in, which was every, 3 or 4 months, it was like $600 to fix. Anyway, took it in when the check engine light came on, found out it was going to be $9,000 to fix, which is more than it was worth. So I was like, no. And we just sold it. Sorry, I'm looking at, there's some questions in the chat that I will answer. So I just sold it to like CarMax because I was like, I'm not going to try and sell this to a person if it has this issue with it. It was still totally drivable. But I was like, I will sell it to one of these corporations. I have no problem. And they have their thing. They check the engine before they'll buy it from you. And they gave me $2,000 for it. And that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so we were just like, let's just not buy a car because we had another car. We don't need two right now. We're just home all the time. So we still just haven't gotten one. So I guess my advice is when life throws you a pandemic, don't buy a new car. But that made that decision really easy. And once we get out of this, I'm probably going to have to buy a new car. But Jorge has a little bit more. We got to do some math to figure this out, right? So his current car is fully paid off. So here's what we want to do. We're talking about over the next 5 years. So let's estimate about what he would have to pay for each car over the next 5 years. So let's go with old car first. All right. He spends about $1,800 per year on repair. So I just want to make sure this is over a 5-year period. So cost per 5 years is what I'm trying to compute. So we're going to expect him to pay about $1,800 a year on repairs. So I'm going to multiply that by 5, right? For 5 years. And then the other thing is the car only gets about 18 miles per gallon, and he's driving 250 miles per week. So we need to come up with a reasonable estimate about what you think gas costs. What does gas cost now, guys? About. Let's round it to something clean. $2.50 or so, $3. Let's say $2.50. Let's go with $2.50. And it doesn't really matter as long as we make the computation using the same number for the old car as we do for the new car, right? So let's say gas is $2.50 per gallon. All right, plus here's what I want to figure out, what he's going to pay for in gas per year, and then I'll multiply it by 5, right? So he drives 250 miles per week. there are 52 weeks per year. So notice what this will leave me with. That's how many miles he drives in a year, right? Then let's convert that to gallons of gas. So this gets 18 miles per gallon. So if I multiply that by 1 gallon per 18 miles, so I'm flipping it. This is now going to leave me with, notice that miles cancels out, how many gallons he uses per year to drive to work, right? Then let's convert it to money. We said it's about times $2.50 per gallon for gas. Notice that now gallons cancel. I'm just going to be left with dollars. This leaves me with how many dollars he's paying for gas in 1 year, but only 1 year. I want to know about 5 years, so I'm going to multiply the whole thing by 5. All right. So look what I did. This is what he'll pay repairs. That's what he'll pay for repairs over the next 5 years. And this is what he'll pay for gas over the next 5 years. So we'll go ahead and just total that up. All right, so I have 1,800 times 5 plus, open parentheses, 250 times 52 times $2.50 divided by 18, and then times 5 at the end. All right, so here's what I end up with. After 5 years, just if you kept the old car, he can expect that's going to cost him about $18,027.78, right? So that's gas, fuel, and repairs. All right, so now let's do, what is the new car going to cost him over the next 5 years? Well, it's maintenance free. So no repairs, we're assuming, over the first 5 years. But he's got to pay $25,000 up front for the car. Plus, again, we got to figure out what it's going to cost him for fuel. Now, it's a much more efficient vehicle. It gets 54 miles per gallon. But we're still going to have to compute what he's going to pay in fuel over the next 5 years. So he's still driving 250 miles per 1 week for the entire 52 weeks every year. Now here's where it changes a little bit. He's getting, for every 1 gallon of gas, he's now getting 54 miles. And we're still going to assume it's 250 per gallon. All right, so that, if we look at the units, gives me weeks cancels, miles cancels, gallons cancels, gives me what he's going to end up paying for fuel in the new car in dollars for a single year. So if I want to know over 5 years, I'm going to multiply that answer by 5. And now we're ready to multiply this out. All right, so I got 25,000 plus 250 times 52 times $2.50 divided by 54, close parentheses, times 5. So I get $28,000.09. Or sorry, $28,009.26 about. All right, so let's look at this. Over the next 5-year period, it's going to cost him almost $10,000 more for the new car than it is just to stick with the old car. So oh, I'm sorry, I just saw your question. I don't know what that's referencing.
Well, I just meant that like I know like with our own experience with our car, like our car we just paid it off recently, so we're not going to want anything that new that we're going to have to keep on
Yeah,
paying off.
sure. So
And
that,
then
I mean, this, what,
also like yeah, just like so if he doesn't have like the 25 up front,
yep,
then how that would work out and yeah, so that's what
absolutely.
I was just
I
curious.
got you. So it would, I'll just mention like, well, that basically that's assuming that he has 25 up front to pay. And yes, absolutely. If he doesn't have $25,000 up front to pay, this is going to get even worse, right? Because he's then going to be paying interest on a car loan. So the total he ends up paying for that car over 5 years is going to be even more. But even if we assume he has that 25,000 up front, the math is showing it's much wiser just to keep the old car, right? Because even if he did, he'd still be paying $10,000 more for the new car over a 5 year span of time. Now, there are other non numerical things to take into account, like, I don't know, maybe it's very important to him to drive a new car very often, and that's part of his quality of life. Okay, well, these are things you can take into account. There are things you're willing to spend money on because you enjoy them, but you should consider those in conjunction with knowing the facts and knowing the numbers, in my opinion. And just knowing, oh wow, this is going to cost me a lot more. What's this going to do for my quality of life? All right, and then just some basic goals to have and solid understanding. Something that Trey brought up. Yeah, you should start a retirement account as soon as possible, but to start a proper one that's not going to be affected by taxes, and we'll talk about that more later. You need to have a full time job. You can start other types of savings accounts first, and you should find a way to make a budget that does allow for savings. Um, Understand the basic mathematics of loans. So it's not super simple. That's the bad news. The good news is there are so many loan calculators. As long as you have a TA 84, it has a loan calculator within it. So you don't need to understand the theory of the math. As long as you know how to use a computer to your advantage to compute the math. One of the most important things we're going to talk about is how huge an impact of paying off a loan early, meaning making more than your minimum payment, will have on the loan in the long run. Um, Understand how taxes are computed. We're going to talk about basic United States tax code. Now, we're not going to go, it's pretty crazy. The United States tax code can be hard to understand. But we're going to go into the basics of it, which is important for you to understand for your personal life. Because if you have even a part-time job, you're paying taxes right now. And then finally understand how the federal budget affects future personal finances. That one is a little bit more of a gray area. I don't know that the federal budget always does affect personal finances. It certainly can have an influence on the economy, but the economy is what we call a chaotic system. There are so many things that have that affect it, that the federal budget, I don't know. I have some. It's very strange, right? Like we are in trillions and trillions of dollars of debt for the first time. I mean, we were in 22 trillion last time I did that intro activity in the last unit, and now we're in 30 trillion. So the only reason money has any value is because we all say it does. So you can't eat it or shelter yourself with it very effectively. But this is the entire economy is based on our buy-in to it. And now that money's much less physical, people aren't making runs on banks like they did in 1929. So the fact that we're in a huge amount of federal debt doesn't mean as much. But we'll talk about that more. Cool. So I think that is all for our first section. Yeah, we'll talk about how to do your own taxes. And actually,